Well, Stephen, it's a huge pleasure and privilege to be with you today, and I think we need to start off by saying thank you to you for acting as Honorary President of the Classical Association this year.
It's a great honour, one which would astonish my Latin and Greek teachers when I was young, possibly, but I hope they'd be pleased and proud that something stuck, if nothing more than enthusiasm.
And of course, this film is being shown for the first time at the Swansea Classical Association conference on the first night of the conference, on the eve of a couple of days of discussion and debate about the
which has been held back, I gather, for 3 years.
3 years.
Darlings, yes. So I send my salutations, salve, to you, and in a bit of cod Latin, I guess it's an omnium gatherum of all that's brightest and best in the classical world, and I'm sure that means that you'll be doing a huge amount of what the Greeks did when they got together to think, which is to drink. So if it isn't too late for you actually to hear me, because you're already lying on your backs, rubbing your tummies, burping, I send you my love and good wishes for a fabulous conference. Have a great time.
I feel like we should be asking the question of the CA conference, how many craters is this symposium going to be? There's that wonderful fragment, isn't there, from Eubulus, where they say, look, after 3 craters, the sensible man goes home, right. But after that, it's breaking the furniture. So if this is going to be a 4-crater CA conference, then we better watch out. But I think it would be a great pleasure and a privilege to say, on behalf of both of us, congratulations to the organisers of the conference for their tenacity during this period at the 3rd attempt to get this conference off the ground because of COVID, and we wish you all the very, very best.
Absolutely right.
So we have some questions for you, and then we're going to move into some questions that have been brought forward by some of our youngest up-and-coming classicists from age under 11 upwards. We're going to be going, but we had to start off by asking about your own youth. You know, when, where, how was your first encounter with the classical world?
It was a mixture. It was a mixture of the myths. I read a collection of them when I was quite small, 5 or 6, and they had wonderful illustrations, and I became very absorbed in this entire world. I loved the idea of the appearances of the gods. It mostly told the stories of Arachne and Narcissus and those, you know, the transformations, and I just found it instantly appealing. It spoke to some part of me. But the second half of it is language, really, and to be honest, and this sounds like, you know, I don't know, false modesty or passive aggression even, but I was hopeless at everything that boys are supposed to be good at. I couldn't do sport. I couldn't run in a straight line. I'd, you know, bump into a tree. I couldn't catch a ball. You know, I sort of clapped at it like a dyspraxic fool, which is probably what I was. And so I was very uncoordinated, but I loved stories and I loved language. Latin then began. It was the kind of old-fashioned English school where you were taught Latin from the age of about 8, and I adored it. And I was thinking about this as I was on my way here. In a way, it was something like a video game. You know how there are characters in video games who have certain powers. They can do some things, but not other things. And where other boys were sort of confounded by things like final clauses and, as they were called, and deponent and semi-deponent verbs, which are special verb forms that appear to be passive but active. And it's all sounds very dry and academic, but I thought of them as being like Alice. You had to be the right side to get into that keyhole. So you alter a word in order to make it work for the game. And so I rather excelled at Latin, I have to say. And that meant that this very shy and wonderful master called Mr. Knight came to me and asked if I was interested in learning Greek. I was about 9 then, probably. And I leapt at it, the idea of having this separate alphabet as well, so I could write my name,
language of your
Stefan Fru, a little upsilon at the end, you know. And it was thrilling, and I would, you know, teach it to other boys, and we'd pass notes in English, but using Greek characters. I'm sure everyone has learned Greek.
Do you have a favourite Latin or Greek word?
Actually, when I was learning Greek, and this is again one of the pleasures, is it gave you new vocabulary by showing you where possible how there was a similar word in English. So graphein, to inscribe, to write, you know, telegraph or graphic, and, you know, and all those pretty obvious things, I suppose, and grammain and all those, phonos and so on. And you could see their English equivalents, telephones and telegrams and all the rest of it. And then a few chapters later, there was a new verb to learn. It was thaumazo, which is I marvel, I wonder. And it said, this is easily remembered by thinking of the English word thaumaturge. To a 9-year-old boy, she's still a thaumaturge. So well, I've never forgotten it because it was so bizarre.
I mean, I guess it works.
Exactly, it means a worker of wonders and a miracle worker. And so I've always remembered thaumaturge for that reason.
It's like when someone comes up and goes, of all the 30% of English words that have a Latin root, kind of, or something like that, people go, Sisyphean.
Yes.
That's the word we get. And you just think, well, hang on a sec, it's probably not the most obvious.
Easier ones. Yeah. Telephone in your pocket, phone every time you use it.
Would be a good start. And moving from language to kind of characters, obviously you talk about how you love your stories. Do you have a character from the ancient world that you identify with the most?
Yes, I mean, as a boy, sometimes the young, the boys who, like Phaeton, who foolishly, trapped his father, the sun god or sun titan, into allowing him to drive the chariot of the sun across the sky, and so I kind of pictured that because my brother, who was older than me, was begging his father, "Oh, let me drive the car, just in the driveway, go on," and it was so real. And everything else that presented a story that I knew wasn't true, for a young person, it's nearly always there are good people and there are bad people, heroes and villains. And from the very first in the Greek stories, people were good and bad. They were mischievous, they lied, they were boastful, they made mistakes, but they were charming and they were witty. And Hermes is the perfect example. He's a thief, but he's also the god of storytellers.
I think I'm getting an indication of what your answer might be to a question later on. This is the second time Hermes has come out of this conversation.
That's true, actually, isn't it?
You're letting it.
So it was really that. It was and Icarus, which is a similar sort of story, really flying. And even today, it's almost impossible to read of an important news story and not map it to a myth.
That other point that you make as well, that none of the characters from the ancient world are strict heroes or villains.
There's an ambiguity.
And there's the grey in the middle, isn't there, which kind of is so important.
It really is.
We remind people that we have that
place,
and it's
it was Shakespeare who really took on the job of showing the complete complexity of the human character. And it's a mistake not to remember that in ancient Greece, particularly the ancient Greece in which the myths were invented, the archaic and pre-archaic Greece, rather than the one we think of as being civilized and full of justice and democracy. But even that Greece, of course, they weren't quite like us. They didn't have the same priorities about human living, and it would be a mistake to think that. But nonetheless, the basic primal human appetites. One of the great, we're talking about the Greeks, not the Romans, which is revealing perhaps, but...
Shh, don't tell anyone. I prefer the Greeks.
Exactly. As I'm sure many of you know, when you meet a fellow classicist, they often say, are you a Hellenist or a Latinist?
I won't begrudge the answer.
No, but one of the things about the Greeks, I think, is that they were aware that they were different, and they knew they combined two forms of humanity that had never really been combined in that way before. That is the reasoning capacity, the ability to count, to think, to be, to use a rational sense to order the world around them and to think about how it can be improved and to progress. So many of their myths are about changing and progressing and being punished for it.
And becoming comfortable with that.
And it's understanding that the nature of a human is, and this, it was the darling man Nietzsche who best expressed it, that we have an Apollo inside us, the golden Apollo of reason and oratory and truth-telling.
And also
music
the Apollo of plagues
and
pestilence.
But we also have a Dionysus, which is the god of frenzy and appetite and addiction and bloodlust, and those two things are at war with each other all the time, as they were in Greece.
Now I'm not sure what you're going to reply to the question about Apollo or Hermes later on.
Yes,
I can't decide
that,
which side you're on. But so if you were hosting your dinner party and you could have anyone, any should we say historical character? Well, let's put it into historical. From the Roman or from the Greek world, who would you have?
Well, I think, let's say we have a dinner, a few guests. I think we'd have to have Socrates. I mean, it's so obvious. He's an extraordinary man. I mean, he is the patron saint of teachers. You must find that as a teacher. You've got problems with him.
I don't know if I want to have the reputation that he had.
Oh, no, definitely.
I hope my students aren't saying anything quite so.
Of course. He humiliated a lot of his students, or seemed to humiliate them, simply by... It was almost like stripping their skin by just questioning what they meant. But it is the great method. It's still a great method, really. And one must do it to oneself. What do I mean by that? Am I being honest? And at this time of culture wars and everything else, we have to be very sure about our biases, and the Socratic method can help peel them away, and so that we can really examine what we feel, what we see, and what we know, without all the prejudices and biases and pride and other human things. And he is, in that sense, an extraordinary master.
So Socrates is there. Who
Yeah,
else would
and
you
for
have?
glamour, I would have to say 2 glamorous guests. I mean, it's terrible I'm not inviting a woman, but we have to accept that women were not privileged much in ancient Greece, and there are some extraordinary female heroines in myth and in real Greek life. But I'm choosing 2 men of strange natures in some ways. One was a friend and enemy of Socrates, Alcibiades, and the other is Alexander the Great. I mean, you know, what an extraordinary man he was, and to meet him would be just... I mean, he was taught by Aristotle, so one must assume that he, you know, and believe that he had a, you know, a training and a way of a logic. After all, Aristotle
I'd love to see Socrates have a go at Alexander the Great. Wouldn't be fab. With Alcibiades as the moderator, mediator.
The moderator, and Alcibiades had an extraordinary life himself, and was a hothead and a liar and a braggart, but also incredibly charismatic.
At this dinner party, if we were put it back into the symposium, and you had your drinking cups, and you were the symposium master, and so you were picking your drinking set, your kailikes for the occasion, and you could have any image on your drinking cup.
Oh, on the kailikes or
on the
canthros,
so,
is
yes.
the other one.
What would be your kind of key images that you would want to see?
Well, I'm a romantic and I'm a gay man, so to me, one of the most common kailik coverings, engravings, was a scene from the life and death, indeed, of Achilles and Patroclus.
Absolutely.
And I think that would please me. There's one, Achilles bathing, it's a famous one, bathing the wounds of Patroclus after he's died. And
now, we've had a question about what's the most surprising reaction you've ever had after you've told somebody a story from the ancient Greek and Roman worlds? Kind of how have people reacted to it?
Well,
what's the weirdest or the most surprising reaction?
Well, it was the impetus for me to write the book Mythos, really. Was I was at a party. I won't dignify it with the term dinner party. Exactly, I was eating with some friends, but I said it's a bit like the neutering of the gelding of Uranus, and they said, "What do you mean?" So I started to tell the story of the Gaia and Uranus, and then Kronos and the scythe, and Aphrodite being born, and connecting it to the birth of Venus, the famous painting, and they were staring at me and saying, "Why didn't I ever know this? How do you know it?" And I said, "Well, I've always just found those stories interesting." And I realized that a lot of people were like that with the Greek myths and the whole that sort of world, that they knew the names but they didn't know the connection. And I thought, well, tell those stories.
And was there a particular myth or story that you've dealt with in one of your books that was harder for you to put across than others? Was there a particular moment where you went, "How do I tell this story?"
I think the third book, Troy, was difficult because, well, partly because a certain amount of that story is told better than anyone has ever told the story in the Iliad of Homer, but also that it's so bloody. You can't really understand what's going on in Troy unless you move into the mindset of the warrior caste and of what it means, the blood and the honor, and also the sacrifices and the nature of what happens after you die, how you're honored, which is at the very basis of the fundamental arguments towards the end of the Iliad, is all to do with the burying of the bodies, and it really matters. And so I didn't want to tell it as an adventure purely, but I didn't want to go too deeply into the sort of psychology or to patronize the Greeks by saying, well, they thought, bless them, they thought this, but to just try and enter their worldview, which is always exciting, but you have to be very, you're walking on eggshells. It is a fine line, isn't it?
And we covered it and talked a little bit about this, but is there a lesson from antiquity that you think that people desperately need to remember or at least have in their minds today?
That's a really interesting one. I mean, I suppose it is to recognize what is inside us, that we are compounded of different instincts and impulses, qualities and characteristics. And you could call that a pantheon. We have gods inside us, some of which look after our appetites and some of which tend us towards the countryside and to celebrating and being part of nature, and others that impel us to war, and to others that want us to make things with our hands. You know, that we have all these qualities, and that the Olympian 12 kind of pretty well cover most of that. And I just think that what the ancient world's wider view, as it were, of humanity is more realistic and practical and truer. And I think we lost it for a while, and then it was reborn, and literally renaissance. And some of it came back and helped us towards perhaps a more balanced way. But we still should remember that we are victims of all kinds of fury and appetite.
Now, alongside just talking about and loving and enjoying the ancient world, obviously, one of our jobs is to inspire the next generation.
Yes.
And how do you think is the best way to get a younger audience excited and interested about the ancient world?
It's interesting that the three most successful phenomena in storytelling of our age are George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, and obviously the Harry Potter series, and in fact the foremost, I suppose you could say, Hobbit and the Middle-earth stories of Tolkien, and of course the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And all of these have an enormous debt to Greek myth, and in a sense they're a return to it. And so you're going back to discover that actually humans have always gloried in thinking about how humans can transform themselves, and how you can make stories and myths and legends out of human activity that is somewhere between fantasy and, if you like, symbol and metaphor. And it's a way of looking at the world. You see, you can look back at something like an ordinary fireplace, and you can see in it, if you have eyes, you're there, I can see the Ionic egg and dart, as it's called. And you can, I don't expect everyone to know that now, and the Portland vase and various other elements of the Ram's Head scroll.
Never has this fireplace been given such kind of detailed study.
But it's Ionic, I can say that. But the point is that without us knowing it, sleeping inside our buildings, inside our language, inside our pictures and our history and even our way of thinking, deep inside it, is a Greek and a Latin, Roman way of thinking and being that we're built up on, and it's an energy inside us that is often unreleased. And
long may you carry on telling those stories. And if the tables were turned here and you were sitting in the interviewer's chair, you could have anyone again from the ancient world to interview. So not a relaxed dinner party conversation, but really to put under the spotlight and get them to nail their colours to the mast. Who would that be?
That's an interesting one. I mean, I love the glorious Achilles, and Odysseus is a natural hero. But I suppose you could go back a few generations and say that he takes probably more character from Theseus. Before Theseus, heroes were like Bellerophon or Heracles. They were incredibly strong and brave, and sometimes loyal and charming, and and holy almost. But Theseus, he used his brain, and he was the patron, and is the patron of Athens.
Theseus would be in the chair. Yeah. Okay, well, I'd love to see that interview when that's next broadcast, perhaps at the next CA, if we can tempt you back. Now we have to move on to some questions that have come in from the next generation of classicists.
Super.
This comes from Krish Zagorski-Shah, who asks, which ancient monster are you most afraid of? So,
I would say there's a monster called the Linnaean Hydra. Lived in a lake. Yes, because the Hydra was pretty much unbeatable. I mean, even Heracles couldn't do it on his own. The thing is, it's like a many-headed monster filled with the most appalling venom, the most terrible, terrible, deadly poison. And if you cut off a head, a number more would grow. I don't think we ever settled on how many more.
No, I think different stories.
A different number grew, but it's used as a sort of metaphor these days that a particular problem can be like a many-headed hydra, and you cut off the head, and more grow. So he had to get his get his nephew to hold a burning torch, and he'd cut the head off, and then the torch would cauterize the stump.
Well, I hope we haven't given Chris nightmares now.
No.
Now we move on to Matilda Bird. The judgment of Stephen is required. This is a snog, marry or avoid question. Snog, marry or avoid. You've got Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena.
Oh goodness. Snog Aphrodite, obviously, the beautifully formed lips. Marry Athena. I mean, I was in love with Athena as a boy. There was, as soon as her grey eyes appeared in a story, I would think, oh, in safe hands. Because also I liked the heroes she liked. So I liked Odysseus, and she was very, very tight with Odysseus. And
That
Hera,
leaves
I would definitely avoid. Hera had a nasty temper, and she's always described as cow-eyed, which sounds appalling, but actually I think it was supposed to be a compliment.
But still, probably best avoided. I think I'm with you on that one. For the Susanna Filippo has come back. Which role from ancient Greek drama would you most like to have acted?
Oh, that's interesting. I have acted actually the two parts that I would have. I said are probably amongst the best in Greek drama for men. One of the beauties of Greek drama is how fantastically women are represented. Medea and Clytemnestra and so on. But I would say I played when I was about 17. Creon. I call him Creon because crayon sounds like a thing you draw with.
I agree.
And he was the brother-in-law of Oedipus and brother of Jocasta, and he has an important role, particularly in Antigone, which is perhaps the masterpiece of Sophocles, but certainly one of the great plays of the ancient world, unquestionably. And he is a difficult man to play because he seems like a brutal alpha male, or at least, what we would call a toxic male these days. And he pits himself against his niece. But it is, I think, a great role. It's an important role to get right.
And he starts so sure of himself, doesn't he? And ends up not knowing anything, right? So that transition and that journey is
exactly
the key thing.
And you can have an evening in which you have Oedipus in the first half, and because the plays are short, and you can have Oedipus Tyrannos, Oedipus Rex at the beginning, and you can have Antigone in the second half. And there you see Creon in the first half. He's more of, you see how pragmatic he is and how he wants it all to work out, and he has pride in family, but then it all goes to his head. So he's a good role. Creon, I think, is wonderful, but Oedipus is a fantastic role.
All right, well, we'll move on to Peter Hulse's question, which is that which lost work of classical literature would you like to have been able to read?
Oh, that's a good question.
And
it's worth saying for those who don't know that we only have the tip of the iceberg of the plays that were written in Greece. And Euripides has the most surviving, and Sophocles has 9 out of 100 that he wrote, because he was quite well known, very, very well known. They all won prizes, and they were significant citizens. And there is a Sophocles play, an Aeschylus play. God, I can't even remember who wrote it now, which is, you're going to think I'm obsessed now, which is Achilles and Patroclus, which apparently does represent them as real lovers. And that's the rumour. I haven't followed the sources and the extracts that prove this, but that is, I believe, the general understanding that there is a play. And there are plays about almost every interesting character you can think of. And it's such a shame that we don't have them, because the evidence of the existing plays is that they are likely to have been stunning.
The last question is from Louise Andrew. If there was one myth that you could force every politician to read, what would it be and why?
Well, my first instinct is to say that the portrayal of Agamemnon in the Iliad is a warning to all leaders, because it's a brilliant portrait of a bad leader who isn't that bad a man, but his judgment was so amiss, and it was a mixture of pride and the assumption he knew better than people around him, and his refusal to listen to good advice. I think it's the best portrait of bad kingship until Shakespeare, really. But then I suppose, it is probably that story again of just trying too hard. Icarus, because we all need that, but politicians more than most. Don't fly too close to the sun. They say Philip of Macedon, the father of Alexander, had a man with a bladder on the end of his stick to bang him on the head, who could come in, he was licensed. Philip could be in bed with his wife or someone else. He could be around a campaign table with his generals. This fellow would come in and bash him on the head, say, Philip of Macedon, great king and emperor, one day you will lie rotting in the grave.
Remember, you are just a man.
Exactly that.
Kind of thing. Right, we have come to the quick fire round.
Yes.
If you are ready, if you need a moment to prepare yourself for
I'll
the
do
quick
my
fire
best
round,
to
then
be
kind of
quick
right.
fire.
Okay, here we go. Save Hector or Patroclus?
Hector, surprisingly after what I've said, there is a real nobility to Hector, and I can't bear how he died.
Who's the better hero, Aeneas or Odysseus?
Oh, Odysseus. He's got a brain. Aeneas is a soppy, pious... No, I like Aeneas.
I would love to see that in the undergraduate essay come back. It's brilliant. Odysseus, he's got a brain. Better choice, the best choice for bedtime reading, Sophocles or Euripides? I mean, neither are particularly good.
Sophocles for drama, Euripides for psychology, I would say.
Best reading for when you're supposed to be working, Ovid or Juvenal?
Juvenal.
Preferred costume. This is the question we've been building to for the entirety of this interview, kind of where you've been leading me down one trail and another as to which way you're going to go. Preferred costume for yourself to go to a Greek god's dressing up party. Is it Apollo or Hermes?
Has to be Hermes. I mean, I look at my paunch. I could only be Silenus, but I mean, Hermes. Plus, you get the props. I mean,
the sandals would be pretty fancy.
And Hermes gave music to Apollo anyway. So if Apollo has a lyre, it really belongs to Hermes. But he's got his caduceus and he's got his sandals and his little bowler hat and his wings on it, and he's just great.
Done. Better language for telling a story, Latin or Greek?
I would say, and I would say Greek for story, Latin for poetry.
Best quote to live by. Is it know thyself or nothing in excess?
I think know thyself is a superb, lifelong adventure. There's no single answer to it. Nothing in excess, yeah, that's good too. It's one of the things I like about Zoroastrian, is that it's as big a sin to underindulge as it is to overindulge. And I think that's rather pleasing, isn't it? So for them, someone who says no to everything, no, I'm not going to do it, is as embarrassing and foolish as someone who says, yeah, give me more of that. So that's a Greek idea, I suppose, the golden,
the golden mean, the balance, the right point. Well, Steve, it has been an honour and a privilege and a pleasure to interview you. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you also on behalf of all the creative writing competition winners who have been, some of the stories are absolutely fabulous. And we cannot wait to kind of hear your reading of the winner. And kind of, I believe it's Madeline with Fate's Engine that you have been recording.
And it's a remarkably beautifully written story. And like the best short stories, this story is so subtle and so beautifully balanced in the way it releases the information of what's going on and where we are, that I was genuinely really taken, and I had to spend a lot of time with it, which is, I'm sure, a great sign of quality.
Well, there couldn't be a better compliment than that, Stephen Fry. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.